I'm Emma, 18, and my parents kicked me out of our house on my birthday because I refused to give them access to my trust fund. What they didn't know was that I'd been secretly managing all their finances for 2 years, including their credit cards, investment accounts, and business loans. When they threw my belongings on the lawn and told me I was ungrateful and worthless, I made a decision that would destroy their comfortable lifestyle within 72 hours. The family that raised me to be responsible with money was about to learn what financial responsibility really meant when their own daughter controlled every dollar they thought they owned. Think you can predict how this family drama unfolds? Hit that like button if you believe karma works in mysterious ways, subscribe for more shocking family betrayal stories, and let's dive into how two parents who prioritized money over their daughter discovered that greed has consequences they never saw coming. Growing up in the Morrison household meant living under a microscope, where every penny was accounted for and every financial decision required a family meeting. My parents, Robert and Linda Morrison, had built their wealth through a combination of real estate investments, stock trading, and my father's consulting business. On paper, we were the picture of upper-middle-class success: sprawling suburban home, luxury cars, country club memberships, and annual vacations to Europe. But behind the facade of financial prosperity was a family dynamic built on control, manipulation, and the constant reminder that everything I enjoyed was a privilege that could be revoked at any moment. From the age of 12, I was required to maintain detailed budgets for my allowance, justify every purchase over $20, and sit through weekly financial literacy sessions where my parents lectured me about the value of money and the importance of making smart investments. "Money doesn't grow on trees, Emma," my father would say during these sessions, usually while reviewing printouts of our family's various account balances. "Everything you have, everything you enjoy, comes from years of hard work and careful planning. You need to understand that financial security is the foundation of everything else in life." My mother would nod approvingly, adding her own commentary about how spoiled children from other wealthy families were destined for failure because they didn't understand the value of a dollar. "We are teaching you responsibility," she'd explain. "When you inherit what we've built, you'll need to know how to manage it properly." The irony was that while they preached financial responsibility, both my parents were incredibly reckless with money when it came to their own desires. My father's business expenses included frequent trips to expensive restaurants, golf outings with clients that looked more like personal entertainment, and technology purchases that were justified as necessary investments, but clearly served his personal interests. My mother's spending habits were even more problematic. She maintained multiple credit cards with rotating balances, justified expensive clothing purchases as networking investments, and had a weakness for home renovation projects that invariably cost twice their original budgets. Their idea of financial responsibility applied only to other people's money, never their own. By the time I turned 16, I'd developed a sophisticated understanding of personal finance that far exceeded my parents' actual practices. While they lectured me about budgeting, I could see that their own financial management was chaotic and unsustainable. Credit card statements arrived monthly showing balances that fluctuated wildly. Investment accounts were frequently raided to cover shortfalls in their checking accounts. Business expenses were mixed with personal purchases in ways that made accurate tracking impossible. The turning point came when my grandfather died during my junior year of high school, leaving me a substantial trust fund that wouldn't be accessible until my 18th birthday. The trust was worth approximately $800,000, invested conservatively in blue-chip stocks and municipal bonds that generated steady returns. My grandfather had specifically structured the trust to prevent my parents from accessing the funds, having observed their financial habits over the years with growing concern. When the trust details were revealed during the will reading, my parents' behavior changed dramatically. Suddenly, our weekly financial literacy sessions became focused on trust fund management and the responsibilities that come with inherited wealth. They began introducing me to their financial advisor, their accountant, and their estate planning attorney, claiming they wanted to ensure I had proper guidance when accessing my inheritance. But their real intentions became clear through small comments and suggestions that grew increasingly direct over time. They started talking about family investment opportunities, where my trust fund could be put to better use than sitting in conservative investments. My father mentioned several business ventures that could benefit from fresh capital, while my mother suggested that combining family resources would provide better diversification and higher returns. The pressure intensified as my 18th birthday approached. Family dinners became strategy sessions where they outlined elaborate plans for how my trust fund could be used to expand the family's investment portfolio. They spoke about real estate deals that required significant capital infusions and business partnerships that could multiply our wealth exponentially if we pooled our resources. What they didn't realize was that I'd been paying attention to more than just their financial advice. I'd been watching their actual behavior, tracking their spending patterns, and gradually understanding the true state of their financial situation. By carefully observing bank statements, credit card bills, and investment account summaries that they left around the house, I'd developed a comprehensive picture of their finances that revealed a family living far beyond their actual means. The wealthy lifestyle they maintained was increasingly supported by debt, creative accounting, and financial juggling that was becoming more precarious with each passing month. They needed my trust fund not to expand their wealth, but to prevent their house of cards from collapsing entirely. But they'd made one crucial mistake in their financial planning. They'd taught their daughter to be smarter with money than they were themselves. What my parents didn't know was that their financial literacy education had created a monster. By the time I turned 17, I wasn't just tracking my own allowance and expenses. I was secretly monitoring every aspect of our family's financial situation with the attention to detail of a forensic accountant. It started innocently enough. My mother would leave credit card statements on the kitchen counter while she cooked dinner, and I'd glance at them out of curiosity. My father would forget to close his laptop after checking investment accounts, and I'd notice the numbers before the screen went dark. Over months of casual observation, I began to see patterns that painted a disturbing picture of our family's true financial health. Our house, which my parents claimed was fully owned, actually carried a mortgage balance of over $400,000. The luxury cars in our driveway were leased, not purchased, with monthly payments that consumed nearly $2,000 of their income. Credit card balances fluctuated between $40,000 and $60,000 across multiple accounts, with minimum payments that barely covered the interest charges. Most shocking was discovering that my father's consulting business, which he portrayed as highly successful, was actually struggling to generate consistent revenue. Client payments were irregular, and several major accounts had been lost over the past year. My mother's part-time work in real estate contributed minimal income, and their investment portfolio had suffered significant losses during recent market downturns. The mathematical reality was stark. My parents were spending approximately $3,000 more per month than they earned, covering the shortfall through a complex web of credit cards, home equity loans, and occasional withdrawals from retirement accounts. Their financial advisor had been warning them about unsustainable spending patterns for over a year, but they'd ignored his recommendations in favor of maintaining their lifestyle. But my real education came from discovering how they'd been managing this precarious situation. My parents had developed an elaborate system of financial juggling that involved moving money between accounts, timing credit card payments to avoid late fees, and using balance transfers to manage interest rates. They were essentially running a one-family Ponzi scheme, using new credit to service old debts while hoping that some future windfall would solve their underlying problems. That windfall, I realized, was supposed to be my trust fund. The revelation came during a family dinner in February, 4 months before my 18th birthday. My parents were discussing their latest investment opportunity, a real estate development project that required $500,000 in upfront capital. They spoke excitedly about projected returns and the potential for doubling their money within 2 years. Of course, we'll need to access Emma's trust fund to participate, my mother said casually, as if my inheritance was already part of their available assets. It's exactly the kind of opportunity grandfather would have wanted us to pursue with his money. My father nodded enthusiastically. The timing is perfect. Emma turns 18 right before the investment deadline, so we can access the funds immediately and get positioned before the best opportunities are taken by other investors. They continued planning how to spend my inheritance while I sat at the table, listening to them discuss my financial future, as if I wasn't present. The casualness with which they assumed access to money that legally belonged to me was both infuriating and revealing. In their minds, my trust fund was already theirs. I was simply the legal mechanism through which they could access it. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If my parents wanted to teach me about financial responsibility, I was going to become their best student. But instead of learning how to manage money, I was going to learn how to control it. Over the next several weeks, I began systematically gathering information about every aspect of our family's finances. I photographed credit card statements, memorized account numbers, and created detailed spreadsheets tracking their spending patterns. I researched our mortgage terms, lease agreements, and investment account structures. Most importantly, I began to understand the specific mechanisms they used to move money between accounts and manage their cash flow. The breakthrough came when I discovered that many of their accounts still listed me as an authorized user or emergency contact from when they'd first started teaching me about banking several years earlier. Credit cards I'd been given for emergencies still carried my name. Investment accounts included my social security number as a beneficiary contact. Even their primary checking account had my information on file as someone authorized to receive account information in case of emergency. What my parents had intended as educational tools became the foundation for something far more sophisticated. I began calling financial institutions, using the account information I'd gathered, and discovering that my access to their financial information was far more comprehensive than they realized. By March, I had complete visibility into their financial situation, including real-time access to account balances, transaction histories, and pending payments. I knew exactly when bills were due, which accounts were overdrawn, and how they were managing their monthly cash flow crises. But knowledge wasn't enough. I needed leverage. The solution came from an unexpected source, my parents themselves. During one of our weekly financial literacy sessions, my father explained how authorized users on credit card accounts could request holds or freezes if they suspected fraudulent activity. It's a protection mechanism, he explained, that allows family members to protect each other's financial interests. He had no idea, he'd just handed me the keys to their entire financial kingdom. My 18th birthday was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became the day my parents revealed their true priorities, and I discovered just how far they were willing to go to access my inheritance. The day started normally enough: birthday breakfast, presents, and the usual family rituals that had marked special occasions throughout my childhood. My parents seemed unusually excited, more energetic than I'd seen them in months. They'd planned a special dinner at our country club and invited several family friends to join the celebration. But the real purpose of the day became clear during lunch, when my father announced that we had important business to take care of before the evening festivities. He'd arranged a meeting with their financial advisor, their attorney, and a representative from the bank that managed my trust fund. "Now that you're 18, my mother explained with barely contained excitement, we can start implementing the investment strategies we've been discussing. Your trust fund needs active management, and we've found the perfect opportunity to maximize its potential." The meeting was held at their attorney's office, a prestigious downtown firm that specialized in estate planning and wealth management. The conference room was filled with professionals who'd clearly been briefed on my parents' expectations for how the afternoon would proceed. The trust fund representative explained the mechanics of accessing my inheritance, paperwork that needed to be signed, verification procedures that needed to be completed, and investment options that were available. The money had grown to $847,000 over the years, conservatively invested, but steadily accumulating value. The funds can be transferred immediately, the bank representative explained, once Emma signs the appropriate authorization forms and indicates how she'd like the money managed going forward. That's when my parents made their move. The attorney produced a comprehensive investment management agreement that would give my parents complete control over my trust fund while keeping it technically in my name. The financial advisor presented portfolio recommendations that involved liquidating the conservative investments and putting everything into the high-risk real estate deals my parents had been discussing for months. "It's really the smart approach," my father explained, his tone suggesting that any other option would be financially irresponsible. "Your grandfather invested conservatively because he lived through the Depression, but market conditions are completely different now. This is your opportunity to turn a modest inheritance into real wealth." My mother nodded supportively. "We've done all the research, sweetheart. These investments could triple your money in just a few years. But we need to move quickly before the opportunities disappear." The pressure in the room was intense. 4 professionals were looking at me expectantly, waiting for my signature on documents that would transfer nearly $1 million to investment strategies chosen entirely by my parents. The message was clear: sign the papers and celebrate becoming an adult, or refuse and face the consequences of disappointing everyone who'd taken time from their busy schedules to make this meeting possible. I asked to review the documents privately, which caused immediate tension. "There's nothing complicated here, Emma," my father said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "These are standard investment management forms. The longer we wait, the more money you'll lose by keeping everything in those conservative accounts." But I insisted on taking time to read through everything, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. The investment management agreement wasn't just giving my parents control over how my money was invested, it was giving them complete access to withdraw funds for any purpose they deemed beneficial to the family's overall financial health. The real estate investments they'd chosen were partnerships that required significant upfront capital with no guarantees of returns. Even worse, the deals involved ongoing financial commitments that could require additional investments if the projects encountered problems. I wouldn't just be risking my inheritance, I'd be potentially liable for losses that exceeded my original investment. When I explained my concerns and requested more time to consider my options, the mood in the room shifted dramatically. The professionals began packing up their materials, clearly disappointed that the meeting hadn't proceeded as planned. My parents' excitement transformed into barely controlled anger. "Emma," my mother said, her voice tight with frustration, "we've spent months arranging these opportunities. You can't just waste everyone's time because you are having second thoughts about decisions we've already made as a family." The drive home was silent, but I could feel the tension building. My parents were furious that I hadn't signed the documents, and they made no effort to hide their disappointment. The birthday dinner they'd planned felt more like a funeral, forced conversation, uncomfortable silences, and the underlying sense that something fundamental had changed in our family dynamic. The confrontation came that evening, after we'd returned from dinner and the last of our guests had departed. My parents asked me to join them in my father's office for a serious conversation about my future and my responsibilities to this family. What followed was 2 hours of increasingly aggressive pressure to sign the investment management documents. They alternated between emotional manipulation, "Don't you trust us to help you make good decisions?" Financial intimidation, "You'll lose everything if you don't start investing aggressively," and finally, outright threats about my place in the family. We've given you everything, my father said, his voice rising with each word. This house, your education, every opportunity you've ever had, all of it came from our hard work and sacrifice. Now you have the chance to contribute to this family's success, and you're being selfish and ungrateful. My mother was even more direct. If you're not willing to be part of this family's financial team, then maybe you don't belong in this family at all. We've raised you to be responsible and generous, but you're acting like a spoiled child who doesn't understand how the real world works. When I continued to refuse to sign the documents, they delivered their ultimatum: sign the papers and remain part of the family, or pack my belongings and find somewhere else to live. You have until tomorrow morning to decide, my father announced. Either you're with this family or you're on your own. But you're not going to live in our house and benefit from our support while refusing to contribute to our shared success. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom for what I now knew might be the last time, I made a decision that would change all our lives forever. If my parents wanted to teach me about the real world, they were about to get an education themselves. I woke up on the morning after my 18th birthday, knowing exactly what I had to do. My parents had made their choice, money over their daughter, and now I was going to make mine. The girl they'd raised to be financially responsible was about to show them what real financial power looked like. The house was quiet as I methodically packed my belongings. 3 suitcases held everything that truly mattered to me: clothes, personal items, laptop, important documents, and the detailed financial records I'd been secretly compiling for months. Everything else could stay behind in the life I was leaving forever. My parents emerged from their bedroom around 9 a.m., clearly expecting to find me ready to capitulate. Instead, they discovered me loading suitcases into my car, a vehicle that was titled in my name, but paid for through their accounts, a detail that would soon become very important. "Emma," my mother said, her voice containing a mixture of disbelief and growing panic, "what are you doing? We need to talk about this rationally." "I'm being rational," I replied, continuing to load my belongings. "You gave me a choice: sign your documents or leave." "I choose to leave." My father's face flushed red with anger. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Do you have any idea how hard it is to survive on your own? You've never paid rent, never bought groceries, never dealt with real bills. You'll come crawling back within a week." "Maybe," I said, closing my car trunk. "But at least I'll still have my trust fund." That's when they realized I wasn't just leaving. I was taking my financial independence with me. The inheritance they'd been counting on to solve their cash flow problems was walking out the door, attached to a daughter who'd learned their financial lessons better than they'd ever intended. "You can't just leave," my mother pleaded, her tone shifting to desperation. "We're family. Families work together. Everything we've done has been to help you succeed." I looked at both of them, the people who'd raised me, educated me, and ultimately betrayed me, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. "If everything you've done has been to help me succeed, then you should be proud that I'm smart enough to protect myself from people who would exploit me financially." My father made one last attempt at control. "That car you're driving. We're making the payments. The insurance is in our name. The cell phone in your pocket is on our plan. You think you can just walk away, but everything you have connects back to us." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "I've been thinking about that." I speed dialed the first number on a list I'd prepared the night before. "Hi, this is Emma Morrison. I need to report suspected fraudulent activity on account number." I recited the digits of my parents' primary credit card account, the one where I was still listed as an authorized user. My parents stared in horror as I explained to the credit card company's fraud department that I'd noticed unusual spending patterns and wanted to request an immediate hold on the account pending investigation. As an authorized user reporting suspected fraud, my request was processed immediately. "What are you doing?" my mother whispered, her face going white. "Learning about financial responsibility," I replied, dialing the second number on my list. Over the next 10 minutes, I systematically contacted every financial institution where I had any form of authorized access. Credit cards were frozen due to reported suspicious activity. Investment accounts were locked pending verification of account holder identity. Even their primary checking account was flagged for review after I reported unusual transaction patterns that concerned me as an emergency contact. The beauty of the system they'd created to educate me was that it provided multiple legitimate channels for me to protect their accounts from what appeared to be fraudulent activity. Every call I made was legal, justified, and impossible to reverse quickly. My parents stood frozen in our driveway, watching their daughter systematically dismantle their ability to access their own money. The house payment that was due in 3 days would bounce. Credit card minimum payments scheduled for later in the week would be rejected. The elaborate juggling act that kept their lifestyle afloat was crashing down in real time. "Emma, stop," my father said, his voice breaking. "You don't understand what you're doing. We have bills, commitments, employees depending on us. You can't just freeze everything." "I'm protecting your accounts from fraudulent activity," I explained calmly. "Isn't that what you taught me to do? Monitor financial activity, report suspicious behavior, take action to prevent theft." My mother started crying, not the manipulative tears she'd used during emotional arguments, but genuine panic at watching their financial world collapse. "Please, sweetheart, we can work this out. We don't have to involve the trust fund. We can figure out other solutions." "You're right," I agreed. "You will figure out other solutions. You'll learn to budget properly, live within your means, and handle your finances responsibly. Isn't that what you always told me? That financial challenges build character." I climbed into my car and rolled down the window for one final conversation. "The account holds will be lifted once you complete financial counseling and prove you can manage money responsibly. Most institutions require 30 to 60 days of demonstrated fiscal responsibility before removing fraud protection measures." My father's face was purple with rage. "You ungrateful little bitch. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." "You gave me everything," I agreed, starting my engine. "Including the knowledge and access necessary to protect myself from people who would steal my inheritance and throw me away when I refused to cooperate." As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, 2 people standing in the driveway of a house they could no longer afford, finally understanding that the daughter they'd tried to exploit had learned her lessons better than they'd ever imagined. But this was just the beginning. Over the next several weeks, they were going to discover exactly how comprehensive their financial education had been, and how thoroughly their student had prepared for this moment. The real revenge wasn't just freezing their accounts, it was watching them learn the same lessons about financial responsibility they'd spent years forcing on me. Sometimes the best teachers are the students who refuse to be victims. Over the next 72 hours, I watched from my hotel room as my parents' carefully constructed financial house of cards collapsed with the devastating efficiency I'd predicted. The multiple account freezes I'd initiated created a cascade of failures that exposed just how precarious their situation had been all along. The first domino fell on day 2 when their mortgage payment bounced. The bank's automated system immediately triggered late payment fees and sent notification letters that would affect their credit score. My parents, who prided themselves on maintaining excellent credit, were suddenly dealing with their first late payment in over a decade. Their credit cards, frozen due to my fraud reports, couldn't be used to cover the shortfall. The complex juggling act they'd perfected, moving money between accounts to cover gaps, was impossible when none of their accounts were accessible. Every automatic payment they'd set up to maintain their lifestyle suddenly became a potential overdraft or returned payment. I knew exactly when each crisis hit, because my father started calling me obsessively, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that chronicled their financial destruction in real time. "Emma, this is insane," came his first message, still angry but with an edge of worry. "You need to call these banks immediately and tell them this was all a mistake. We have business to conduct, and you're interfering with legitimate financial activity." By day 3, the tone had shifted dramatically. "Please, Emma, we need to talk. The mortgage company is threatening foreclosure procedures if we don't bring the payment current within 10 days. Your mother's credit cards have been suspended, and we can't access any of our accounts. People are going to start asking questions." The people asking questions were the first sign that their financial problems were becoming public knowledge. Their country club membership had an automatic monthly charge that bounced, triggering a call from the membership director about account status. Their housekeeper's paycheck was returned for insufficient funds, creating awkward conversations about family financial stability. Most embarrassing was what happened with my father's business clients. Several consulting payments were scheduled to be automatically deposited into his business account, which had also been frozen due to the fraud investigation. When clients called to confirm that payments had been processed, they discovered that his business banking was under review for suspicious activity. "Emma, my mother's voicemail was barely coherent through her sobbing. People at the club are talking. The Hendersons asked me directly if we were having money problems, because word is spreading that our accounts are frozen for fraud investigation. My sister called asking if we needed to borrow money. This is destroying our reputation." The reputation damage was particularly satisfying because it struck at the heart of what my parents valued most: the appearance of financial success. Their entire social circle was built around wealth, status, and the assumption that the Morrison family had their finances perfectly managed. Learning that they were under investigation for potential financial fraud shattered that carefully maintained image. But the real devastation was still coming. As days passed without access to their accounts, my parents were forced to confront the mathematical reality of their situation. Without credit cards to bridge gaps, without the ability to move money between accounts, without access to their emergency funds, they had to survive on the actual cash they had available. That amount was shockingly small. Their checking account had contained less than $3,000 when it was frozen, and my mother's purse held maybe $200 in cash. For a family accustomed to spending thousands of dollars per week on their lifestyle, the adjustment was immediate and harsh. "We can't buy groceries," came my father's most desperate message. "Do you understand what you've done? We can't put gas in our cars. We can't pay for basic necessities because you've frozen everything we own. This isn't teaching us a lesson, it's destroying our lives." The irony was perfect. My parents, who'd spent years lecturing me about budgeting and living within my means, were discovering what it actually meant to have no financial cushion. They were experiencing the terror of not knowing how to pay for basic necessities, a fear they'd never faced because they'd always had credit to fall back on. By the end of the first week, their situation had deteriorated beyond mere inconvenience. Utility companies were sending disconnect notices for overdue payments. Their car leases were in jeopardy because scheduled payments couldn't be processed. The landscaping service that maintained their perfect suburban appearance had stopped coming because their monthly payment had bounced. Most telling was how quickly their relationship with each other deteriorated under financial stress. Through my network of former classmates whose parents moved in the same social circles, I heard rumors about increasingly public arguments between my parents about whose fault the situation was and how they could resolve it. My mother blamed my father for teaching me too much about finance, enabling me to understand their vulnerabilities. My father blamed my mother for her spending habits, claiming that if they'd been more financially stable, they wouldn't have needed my trust fund in the first place. Both blamed me for being vindictive and cruel, but neither acknowledged that their own actions had created this situation. The real breakthrough came when I received a call from their financial advisor, who'd been contacted by multiple institutions trying to verify account activity and resolve the fraud investigations. "Emma," he said carefully, "I think you and your parents need to sit down and work this out before the situation becomes irreversible." "What situation?" I asked innocently. "The credit damage, the reputation issues, the potential legal complications. Your parents are facing serious financial consequences, and frankly, I don't think they have the resources to recover without significant help." That's when I knew my revenge was complete. The people who'd raised me to understand that money is everything were discovering what it meant to have nothing. The parents who'd been willing to sacrifice their relationship with their daughter for access to her inheritance were learning that greed has consequences. But I wasn't finished. The final phase of my plan was about to teach them the most important lesson of all, that the daughter they'd underestimated was far more capable than they'd ever imagined. 2 weeks into their financial crisis, my parents finally swallowed their pride and agreed to meet with me to discuss terms for resolving this situation. The meeting location I chose was symbolic: a modest coffee shop downtown, far from their usual upscale haunts, where they'd have to sit in plastic chairs and order from a menu with prices they'd never had to consider before. They arrived looking like different people. My father's usual confident demeanor had been replaced by the desperate energy of someone facing real consequences for the first time in his adult life. My mother appeared to have aged 5 years in 2 weeks. Her perfectly styled hair was showing roots, her designer clothes looked wrinkled, and her hands shook slightly as she stirred her coffee. "Emma," my father began, his voice carefully controlled, "we need to end this. Whatever point you were trying to make, you've made it. Now we need to focus on repairing the damage and moving forward as a family." "What damage?" I asked, genuinely curious about their perspective. My mother's composure cracked immediately. "What damage?" "Emma, we can't access our bank accounts. Our credit cards are suspended. The mortgage company is starting foreclosure proceedings. Your father's business is hemorrhaging clients because word is spreading that we are under financial investigation. We can't pay our bills, we can't maintain our obligations, and our reputation is being destroyed." "That sounds stressful," I acknowledged. "How are you managing your day-to-day expenses?" "We are not managing," my father snapped, his carefully maintained control evaporating. "We are borrowing money from friends, using cash advances, selling possessions to buy groceries. We are living like college students because our own daughter has sabotaged our financial stability." I pulled out my phone and opened the note-taking app I'd been using to track their situation. "So you're learning to budget carefully, prioritize essential expenses, and live within your actual means rather than relying on credit to maintain an unsustainable lifestyle." The silence that followed was deafening. They were finally understanding that everything they were experiencing, the stress, the fear, the humiliation of financial instability, was exactly what they'd expected me to accept when they kicked me out with nothing. "This isn't the same thing," my mother protested weakly. "Isn't it?" I asked. "You told me that if I wasn't willing to give you access to my inheritance, I could leave and figure out how to survive on my own. You said I needed to learn about the real world and what it means to be financially responsible. So far, you've learned more about budgeting and financial reality in 2 weeks than you taught me in 18 years. My father leaned forward, his tone becoming more aggressive. "Emma, you're playing with fire here. Freezing accounts, filing false fraud reports, there could be legal consequences for what you've done. We could press charges." I smiled, pulling out a folder I'd prepared for this moment. "Actually, Dad, let's talk about legal consequences. I've documented every instance where you used accounts where I was listed as an authorized user or emergency contact. Every call I made to financial institutions was legally justified based on suspicious activity patterns I'd observed. I spread documents across the table, printouts of their spending patterns, credit card statements showing the unsustainable debt accumulation, mortgage documents revealing their lies about home ownership, and detailed analyses of their monthly cash flow deficits. What I discovered during my fraud investigation was that you were systematically spending beyond your means, using complex credit juggling to hide your financial problems, and planning to use my inheritance to cover debts you'd accumulated through years of fiscal irresponsibility. If anyone should be concerned about legal consequences, it's the people who tried to defraud their own daughter. My mother started crying again, but these weren't manipulative tears, they were the broken sobs of someone whose entire world was collapsing. Please, Emma, we made mistakes. We should have been honest about our financial situation. But you're our daughter. Families help each other through difficult times. You're absolutely right, I agreed. Families do help each other. That's why I'm going to make you an offer. Both my parents looked up with desperate hope. I'll help resolve your financial crisis, I continued, but not by giving you access to my trust fund. Instead, I'm going to do something much more valuable. I'm going to teach you the same financial responsibility you tried to teach me. I handed them a comprehensive document I'd prepared with my attorney's help. This is a financial rehabilitation plan. If you complete it successfully, I'll help lift the fraud holds on your accounts and provide limited assistance with your most critical debts. The plan was detailed and non-negotiable. They would attend financial counseling sessions with a certified credit counselor. They would create and stick to a realistic budget that eliminated all non-essential spending. They would sell their house and move into something they could actually afford. They would liquidate luxury items, cars, jewelry, country club memberships, and use the proceeds to pay down debt. Most importantly, they would sign legal agreements acknowledging that my trust fund was entirely separate from their finances, and that they had no claim to any portion of my inheritance, now or ever. This is humiliating, my father whispered, reviewing the requirements. It's honest, I corrected. For the first time in years, you'll be living according to your actual financial situation rather than maintaining an illusion funded by debt. And if we refuse, my mother asked. Then you'll figure out how to resolve your financial problems without my help, just like you expected me to do when you kicked me out. The fraud holds stay in place until the investigations are complete, which typically takes 60 to 90 days. Your credit will be destroyed, your house will be foreclosed, and your reputation will be permanently damaged. I stood up to leave, then turned back for one final comment. You taught me that money doesn't grow on trees and that financial responsibility is the foundation of everything else in life. You were right. The difference is that I learned those lessons well enough to protect myself from people who would exploit me financially, even if those people are my own parents. How long do we have to decide? My father asked. The same amount of time you gave me, I replied. You have until tomorrow morning. As I walked away, I could hear my mother sobbing and my father's voice cracking as they tried to figure out how to salvage what remained of their financial lives. The student had become the teacher, and the lesson was just beginning. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my own apartment, a modest but comfortable place that I pay for with income from my trust fund investments, and a part-time job I genuinely enjoy, watching my parents slowly rebuild their lives according to the financial rehabilitation plan they reluctantly accepted. The transformation has been remarkable, though not in ways they expected. My father's consulting business, stripped of its artificial overhead and expensive office lease, has actually become more profitable by focusing on clients who value results over impressive presentations. My mother discovered that she's genuinely talented at budget-friendly interior design, helping families create beautiful spaces without breaking the bank. They sold the house that was slowly bankrupting them and moved into a townhome they can actually afford. The luxury cars were returned to the dealership, replaced with reliable used vehicles with reasonable payments. Their country club membership was cancelled, along with most of the expensive social obligations that had been draining their resources for years. Most importantly, they completed 6 months of financial counseling that forced them to confront the spending patterns and credit dependency that had been destroying their financial stability for years. The counselor's reports, which I receive as part of our legal agreement, show steady progress toward sustainable budgeting and debt reduction. The fraud holds on their accounts were lifted after they demonstrated 3 consecutive months of responsible financial behavior. Their credit scores are slowly recovering as they pay down debt and eliminate the payment juggling that had been damaging their financial reputation. They are learning, perhaps for the first time in their adult lives, what it actually means to live within their means. But the most significant change has been in our family relationship. The parents who once saw me as a source of financial opportunity now treat me as an independent adult whose boundaries they respect. Our conversations are no longer dominated by discussions of my trust fund or suggestions about how I should manage my inheritance. "We owe you an apology," my mother said during our first family dinner after their financial rehabilitation was complete. "We lost sight of what was important. We treated you like a business opportunity instead of our daughter, and we are grateful that you were strong enough to protect yourself from our mistakes." My father's apology was more difficult, but ultimately more meaningful. "You saved us from ourselves," he admitted. "We were heading for complete financial destruction, and we would have taken you down with us if you'd given us access to your inheritance. What felt like revenge was actually the intervention we needed." The legal agreements we'd signed remain in effect. My trust fund is completely protected from any claims they might make, now or in the future. But more importantly, they've signed documents acknowledging that my financial independence is permanent, and that any future relationship between us will be based on family bonds rather than financial expectations. I've used my inheritance wisely, following the conservative investment principles my grandfather established while adding carefully researched growth opportunities that align with my long-term goals. The money has grown steadily, providing me with financial security while funding my education and supporting causes I care about. Most satisfying has been watching my parents discover genuine financial stability for the first time in years. Without the pressure of maintaining an unsustainable lifestyle, they've found ways to enjoy life that don't require constant financial stress. They seem happier, more relaxed, and more connected to each other than they were during their years of financial juggling. The experience taught me lessons about family, money, and personal boundaries that no amount of financial literacy education could have provided. I learned that love and manipulation can look very similar, especially when money is involved. I discovered that protecting yourself from exploitation isn't cruel, it's necessary, even when the exploiters are people you care about. Most importantly, I learned that the skills required to build wealth, intelligence, planning, discipline, and the ability to see through surface appearances to underlying realities are exactly the same skills needed to protect wealth from people who would take advantage of your success. The trust fund my grandfather left me wasn't just money, it was a test of character, financial wisdom, and the ability to recognize when people's actions don't align with their stated intentions. By the time I was 18, I'd learned enough about money management to pass that test, but I'd also learned enough about human nature to recognize when I was being manipulated. My parents' attempt to access my inheritance taught me that financial predators can be anyone, including family members who claim to love you while systematically planning to exploit you. The most dangerous thieves are often the ones who convince you that stealing from you is actually helping you. But I also learned that justice doesn't always require destroying the people who try to harm you. Sometimes the most effective revenge is forcing them to learn the lessons they tried to avoid, giving them the opportunity to become better people while protecting yourself from their worst impulses. The 18-year-old who was kicked out on her birthday for refusing to hand over her inheritance is now a financially independent adult with a clear understanding of her own worth and the wisdom to protect it. The parents who tried to manipulate their daughter into funding their lifestyle are now financially stable adults who understand the difference between earning money and extracting it from others. Have you ever had family members try to manipulate you financially? Sometimes the people who claim to love us the most are the ones who feel most entitled to what we've earned or inherited. This experience taught me that protecting your financial independence isn't selfish, it's essential, especially when family members view your success as their opportunity. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have signed those documents to keep the peace, or would you have protected your inheritance like I did? I'm curious about your thoughts on family loyalty versus financial self-preservation, especially when parents feel entitled to their children's money. The hardest part of this whole experience wasn't the financial maneuvering or even being kicked out. It was accepting that my parents had prioritized money over our relationship. But ultimately, forcing them to face the consequences of their financial irresponsibility saved our family bonds by removing the money issues that had been poisoning our interactions. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and share your own experiences with family financial drama in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between family harmony and protecting your financial interests? Your stories help others who might be facing similar situations. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family betrayals, financial manipulation, and the complex dynamics that happen when money becomes more important than relationships. Ring that notification bell so you never miss the latest updates about karma, justice, and learning to protect yourself from people who would exploit your success. Please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to set financial boundaries with family members, even when they claim that refusing to help them is selfish or cruel. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to enable their destructive behavior. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your financial security belongs to you, regardless of what family members think they are entitled to. Trust your instincts, protect your assets, and never apologize for refusing to fund other people's irresponsible lifestyles, even if those people raised you. Until next time, keep building your independence, keep setting healthy boundaries, and keep believing that sometimes the best way to help people is to force them to help themselves.